Okay, we're going to get started. So good morning, my name is Ewen Mullins, and from myself on behalf of Teagasc and Lisa Black on behalf of AFBI, we'd like to welcome you to this first All-Ireland Oats Forum. We know there is huge potential to grow oats in Ireland, and I say that not because of any bias, but based on historic fact. Back in the 1800s, oats covered over 650,000 hectares in the south and over 250,000 hectares in the north. So it was really the primary crop grown, but of course it was in effect the biofuel crop driving horsepower at the time. So what does that tell us? That tells us that we have a huge capacity to grow oats on this island. But today, when we wind forward almost 200 years, the area grown is unfortunately a fraction of what it once was. But we do see a growing consumer appreciation of the health and nutritional benefits of oats consumption, which is fantastic. We see a clear and growing market for organic oats and expanding export market. And from an agronomic perspective, we see, based on work by Dermot Forrestill here in Oak Park, that oats are equally as effective as a non-cereal break crop in rotations. So what's the goal of the forum then this morning? So the goal of today, and indeed we hope subsequent meetings, is in short to start a conversation and to facilitate engagement around oats. We hope that the forum becomes a method to share knowledge and identify future needs and opportunities, so that we at the research and the KT side can support the development of the oat sector on the island, both from a Teagasc and from an AFBI perspective. So as you're aware, as I said at the start, the forum itself is a joint Teagasc-AFBI initiative. And in this regard, I'd like to hand over to Lisa Black. Lisa is head of plant testing station at AFBI Crossnacreevy. Over to you, Lisa. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ewen. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I just want to say I'm delighted to see so many people attending today. I'm really pleased that this initiative has been launched. As Ewen said, historically oats have played a major role in agriculture on the island of Ireland. And from a Northern Irish perspective, one of the key functions of AFBI Crossnacreevy is to evaluate varieties. And there has certainly been a noticeable increase in the number of varieties submitted for nationalist testing. And this is a clear indication that there's an anticipated increase in the value of the oat market going forward and increased interest as well. In Northern Ireland today, we have seen an increase in both the area and number of farmers growing oats, and it has huge potential for growth as we look towards an increased uptake of oats by mixed farmers and also specialist cereal growers. AFBI is looking to build on its foundation of oat research work previously led by Ethel White, and we are currently involved in a very successful collaboration with White's Oats with a focus on winter and spring oat agronomy. And for the last 2 years, we've held an oat day at AFBI Crossnacreevy with a view to gathering together growers, industry and researchers to disseminate information and focus on the research needs of the oat industry going forward. On an all-island basis, the Oats Ireland Forum will enable us to share knowledge and expertise, as oat growing practices have some significant differences between the north and the south. So it's a real opportunity as well for us to learn from each other. So I'd like now to move on to our first speaker, who is Chris Green. He very much sowed the seed of this All-Ireland Oat Initiative. And Chris is a non-executive director of White's through his marketing consultancy business. His enthusiasm for this initiative has played a big part in the steps leading to this event today and the initiation of the Oats Ireland Forum. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining. I'm going to cover the what and why for this initiative. Our ambitions will be covered later. In 1980, I was engaged by Guinness to establish a seed crop development company. Back then, there wasn't much interest in oats. The focus was on driving wheat yields forward through the recently formed 10-ton club, and the attractiveness of oilseed rape was accelerating at pace. Increasingly, oats were being sidelined by growers, sidelined by researchers, sidelined by advisors, and in many ways by consumers. There was an innovation drag and no champions for the crop. In the late 80s, on behalf of the company, I signed a long-term contract with the Welsh Plant Breeding Station to commercially represent their emerging oat varieties. That was the start of my journey with oats. Roll on 30 years. It's a warm summer evening. We have just finished a tour of oat varieties at a White's open day at Crossnacrievy. There was a great buzz between growers and stakeholders. I'm sitting having a chat about the latent potential of oats and how we needed to create more interest and gain critical mass on research. What we need, said the chap opposite, is an Irish oat initiative. It was John Finnan speaking. John was a passionate oat crop researcher, pardon me. John was a passionate crop researcher at Oak Park. Tragically, he died in a light aircraft accident. Amongst other things, John was a champion for oats. Here we are today with a gathering from across the oat supply and value chain. Collectively, we can make the idea of an Irish oat initiative the reality that John wished. For breeders to harness the available new technologies and advance the genetic improvements in meeting the needs of growers and processors whilst facing the challenge of climate change and the tighter regulatory controls which are reducing the range of effective pesticides. We are reliant on your continued success, and there will always be an open opportunity for you to visit us in Ireland. After all, we are recognised globally as producing the highest average oat crop yield. For growers to have the quest to make the most sustainable crop in the rotation, to share your knowledge gain, and to help steer agronomic research towards best practice. Could an All-Ireland oat crop benchmark help in that respect? We need to better understand your needs at both enterprise and crop level. Where does our research focus need to be? For agronomists to continue to genuinely take an interest in what is going on in the crop and together with growers capture the yield potential that exists. What is the pathway to optimizing oat performance? What trials do we need for winter, spring, or organic oats? Perhaps let us start with a shared targeted trials protocol to deliver robust and meaningful results. For millers and marketeers to take oats way beyond breakfast, a new era of plant-based foods lies ahead. Consumers will increasingly focus on sustainability and local provenance while becoming more health and nutritionally aware. From farm to pharma, oats should be a magnet for product innovation, and Ireland is well placed to catapult that innovation. For the feed compounder to take a fresh look at the new generation of oats, the high energy and nutritionally dense naked oats and the new low lignin oats offer a prospect of lowering methane in ruminant rations and equally can be an ideal ingredient for pigs and poultry rations. So please do not dismiss oats. With their low carbon footprint and sustainability record, a little research could go a long way in adding a new dimension to your rations, and with it gain a commercial and competitive advantage. For nutritional health researchers to appreciate that despite the many proven health claims on oats, with their unique functional properties, they remain poorly positioned in driving forward a healthier society. Affordable, nutritious, and homegrown, yet overlooked. How can we change that? For regulators and legislators to think more creatively on policies that will deliver on society's needs, on sustainability, on environment protection, on promoting health and well-being, and to take note of the attributes of the humble oat and the role they can play to deliver a more diverse, sustainable, and vibrant Irish agriculture. In Ireland, we are challenged by a dwindling tillage area, but oats should not be seen as a competitor to grassland, but a companion crop in lowering our carbon footprint. In this respect, we need a new approach on how we place a value on sustainability. We know crop gross margins, but what are their carbon margins and how does that relate to grassland? If we are to be serious about achieving a greener agri-economy, then we need new metrics to steer towards meaningful and achievable objectives. You're here today because of your interest in oats. Our challenge is to channel our individual interest and expertise in oats, to link with others in the value chain, to collectively explore and grasp the opportunities that lie ahead. It is my wish, and I'm sure that of John Finnan, that we can drive forward to improve both the value and the uptake of oats. So let's pick up that challenge and champion the cause for oats under the Oats Ireland banner. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Great words, and it's really moving to hear you talk about John in that way. So thank you very much for that. So I'm going to just very briefly go through some of the results of the survey that we asked you to complete in the run-up to this meeting. I'm just going to share my screen here. I hope you can see that now. So basically we asked, I think it was 8 or 9 short questions. Obviously the first one was to get an idea as to your perspective. You can see here we have a full range from the very start in terms of farming all the way through to the end in terms of processing and indeed policymaker. We had 34 respondents and we have had 105 registered for today. So to be fair, we're happy with that turnaround. We asked what are the most important factors that you thought limit the expansion of the oats crop, and as you can see, it's pretty neck and neck. They're all pretty much, there isn't anything really jumping out, because in fact they are all jumping out. Just to note that we asked you to rank them on a 1 to 8, so that's why the x-axis has a weighted scale from 0 to 10 there. It's just a metric that SurveyMonkey puts in on it. Obviously the higher the weighted score, the more important the factor is. So as you can see, profitability is a key issue and limited market opportunities. In addition to that, rotational issues, weed control and disease control are all coming up as issues as well. Delving into the agronomy in a bit more detail, what were the characteristics that we asked you to prioritize in terms of improvement for new varieties? Lodging resistance was ahead of just enhancing treated yield. Obviously disease resistance in terms of crown or fusarium or virus have been listed, as well as mildew as well. In terms of the issues that need to be addressed to support processing, higher kernel count, uniformity of grain size and hullability were the 3 highest ranking. Mycotoxin levels there are obviously a constant issue, and I know Martin and Chris are going to talk about that now shortly. In addition, what grain quality parameters need to be prioritized for improvement in new varieties? Following on from the previous slide, not surprisingly, higher kernel content, grain size, uniformity, specific weight, etc. And indeed, many of these should come probably as no surprise to us all, but it is good to actually get some quantitative metric data on it. In terms of, Chris talked about the need to expand the sector. I think we're all in tune and aligned with that vision. What do we see as the constraints to expanding the selection of oats as a primary feed ration, which has often been listed as a goal that should be expanded? The one issue is the lack of knowledge and maybe the perception that in the animal feed sector, the nutritional benefits of oats are not as clear as they need to be. And that's something that needs to be worked on as well. Is there a need to consider development of alternative oat types? We asked our production techniques, and overwhelming response was yes, 75%. And indeed, is more information needed on the performance of autumn sown spring oats for your specific region? And again, the overwhelming response was yes, almost 80%. So we asked, what was the single most important research target from your perspective that needs to be addressed in the coming years? And what's interesting here is that it breaks down very cleanly into, I suppose, the farming side of things and the production in terms of variety performance across Ireland for consistent yield and quality, sustainability. We need to focus from a research side on the breeding and the agronomic research, and also assisting the food quality as well, and value addition. In the Crops 2030 report, oats was identified as one of the sectors that can add real value to producers. So doing what we can to support that in terms of adding value, recognizing it as a superfood or expanding its food opportunities, as I said, into animal rations and other options as well, were also listed. So collectively, this survey is giving us an initial insight really into I suppose it copper fastens the points that we already are fully aware of. And I'll talk later on about maybe the next steps that we're going to build on this. We have 4 presenters this morning, or sorry, 3 presentations and 4 presenters. The first is Chris Elliot, a professor in Queen's, and Martin Danaher from Teagasc. So can I ask, I'm not too sure, Martin, are you presenting first, or Chris? I'll leave it to yourselves. And this is on monitoring mycotoxins in oats crops.
My knowledge of oats is probably been developed over the last 12 months, so I'm 2 years maybe. I'm a chemist, so I'm not an agronomist. So I'll have to apologise if I make any faux pas in terms of terminologies. So this work that we're talking about today is a monitoring of mycotoxins in oats crops, and it's from 2 projects actually. One project is funded by the Department of Agriculture, and the other one then is a new interreg project called AgriTox. There was a student that did all the work on this. I'm just talking about his work, Lorenzo Di Colli, and Chris and myself are his supervisors. So in terms of mycotoxins, I suppose a lot of you have heard what mycotoxins are, and that they're toxic compounds. They're produced by fungal species. There's 20 or so compounds that are regulated in the European Union, but you'll see later today that there's many more, and they can grow in the field and they can grow in storage. So there has to be a multifaceted approach to their control to prevent their contamination into food. So why are we interested in them? Because they're highly toxic. Some of these compounds are some of the most toxic substances known to man, like particularly the aflatoxins. They're carcinogenic.
This gives me an opportunity as well, Martin, just to say to everybody that please send in any questions you have for the speakers during the presentation through the Zoom chat box. And after each speaker, we'll have a short period just for feedback and Q&A.
These compounds here, the aflatoxins, are particularly nasty compounds and highly toxic. And then we've other compounds like zearalenone and its metabolites, and compounds they're fairly relevant to oats, like T2 toxins, the trichoxines. So in terms of analysis of mycotoxins, there's a range of techniques that can be used for their analysis, and there's many standardized European and AOAC methods and ISO methods that can be used for their detection. A lot of those are based on liquid chromatography, HPLC, with UV fluorescence detection. But nowadays that methodology has moved on, where we're using LC-MS, and the reason we are doing that is because we can do hundreds of compounds in one analysis, rather than your traditional HPLC methods. So traditionally HPLC, because of that, mycotoxin analysis has been very expensive. So now with LC-MS based analysis, you can get hundreds of compounds analyzed for a couple of €100. So like if you're getting 1 or 2 compounds, you can imagine the costs are going to be greatly reduced. So that's kind of the workflow of a method that's basically being used in Chris's lab and my lab. And if you look, your oat sample here goes through this sample preparation procedure. Takes about half a day to prepare a sample once it's weighed out to get them onto the mass spec, which we see down there in the bottom left-hand corner. That machine there is a new modern system that I'll talk maybe a little bit later about. But prior to this, there's a lot of work has to go on in taking the sample. So you have to follow a particular protocol to take the sample based on the size of the consignment, and it's a fairly elaborate sampling plan that has to be carried out, or otherwise you get nonsense results. So in terms of methods, and I suppose why we're probably here today is methods are getting more complex. And whereas the regulated laboratories probably up until the last couple of years have been only testing for 20 compounds, because that's the only ones that have maximum limits set for in the European Union and worldwide. But now these bigger methods are becoming more established in labs. So this is a method that was developed by the group, very famous group in Vienna for mycotoxin research back in 2014, where they were testing for 295 compounds. Last year they hit over 500 mycotoxins in their metabolites in food crops, and more recently then they have this methodology that can take 1,200 compounds, including pesticides, veterinary drugs in feed. Not all those are obviously relevant to oats, but just kind of highlight the methodology advances. In terms of mycotoxins mitigation, they can occur pre-harvest and post-harvest, and I'll be talking a little bit about results that we've carried out in Lorenzo's thesis. But in terms of pre-harvest, there's strategies that can be used to reduce their occurrence, like crop rotation, for example. Whereas post-harvest, then a lot of it's down to management. There's obviously processing carried out at feed mills, which significantly reduce mycotoxins. And it's been reported that some toxins, let's say like T2, HT2, particularly a higher concentration, will reduce up to 99% following processing, removing hulls and cleaning steps. So in terms of our work, this work we published in 2020 is an analytical method. It's for 42 compounds, and we reported some analysis in that and detected number of mycotoxins in samples, T2 and HT2 being the major mycotoxins detected. And we were also detecting T2 glucoside, which is a modified form of T2 toxin. So the maximum limit for these, or the recommended concentration for these at the moment, is for the sum of T2 and HT2. It doesn't include T2 glucoside, but potentially could in the future. The only reason it hasn't to date is because the availability of the standard, in this case, standards donated to us by the US Department of Agriculture. So for other compounds like deoxynivalenol, for example, DON3G now is widely available as a standard, as a monitored in a number of labs. So we applied this method to carry out some work on variety studies, samples that were being carried out in Moore Park in Kildalton over 3 years. There were trials organised by the Department of Agriculture. And from the Moore Park trial here, what you're looking at here is basically different varieties of oats, and we have oats that were sprayed and non-sprayed. And what we're looking at here is on the left-hand side is the type A trichoxine, so the T2, HT2s, and some other compounds thrown in as well. And on the right then is the iniatins. And what we're seeing is on the red is basically sprayed, and the blue is unsprayed. So the unusual result that we got here is we're finding less mycotoxins in the sprayed. Now, this trial wasn't specifically organized to do this type of work, where the samples we have with our composite rather than individual samples. So this year now we've individual samples to analyze, but it was unusual that what we're seeing is lower results in the unsprayed. Might indicate there's some research needed in this area. So in terms of more part, then in terms of the study, this kind of summary of it here. The unusual thing with this as well is no iniatins detected in the 2017 samples for untreated. So in Kildalton, the study was replicated in Kildalton over these years. The difference between these two sites, we're surprised that there was no iniatins actually detected in the Kildalton site, but we're seeing similar thing with the sprayed and unsprayed. Those different fungicides as well being used on the two sites. I see lower prevalence of iniatins, less than 1% in Kildalton site. And again, in 2017, again we see this trend of no mycotoxins in the unsprayed samples, which is very, very unusual. So I suppose we've more work as well carried out on surveys of Irish cereals, but I suppose what our research has shown is the prevalence of mycotoxins is influenced by multiple factors. We're particularly highlighting crop rotation because we've seen a strong influence of crop rotation in terms of previous crop versus conventional production systems. So in terms of the variety studies did not appear to show a difference, but indicated the fungicide application had an effect. In terms of the mycotoxins, T2 and HT2, we were finding some of them above the limits in some samples, but the dehulling would have a significant effect of these in the processed oats. So we'll see a reduction up to 99%. So I suppose the thing is the samples that we were analysing are actually in processed oats, which is important to highlight as well. And we didn't detect any Don or Don 3G in samples, but in samples we also found levels of ochratoxin A and MPA in the samples. These are normally associated with Penicillium verrucosum infection, and they basically will they can occur during your storage. Okay, so like in terms of conclusions, just to kind of wrap things up, I suppose more comprehensive studies need to be carried out at the mills to investigate storage and processing, because like methodology nowadays has moved on quite a bit, and a lot of the knowledge we have is based on older technology in terms of analytical testing. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Martin. Chris, do you wish to add, or do you have slides for? Are you going to?
Yeah, thanks, Ewan. I think Martin did a very good job in covering some of the complexities around mycotoxins and mycotoxin measurement. I think the only things I would add is that it's really, really difficult to predict what the issues will be with mycotoxins. They change with particular seasons. You can't be sure what fungi will be present and not present. And also, you can't be sure if the fungi will actually produce toxins or not. And a lot of the data tends to show now that actually spraying causes the fungi stressed and produce more toxins. And a lot of the views from different parts of Europe are now showing that organic production has a lot less problems with mycotoxins. And then, you know, Martin really give good overview about the analytical capabilities. You can measure hundreds of mycotoxins, but I think in terms of the oats that go into the human food supply chain, we really just focus on those things that are regulated by the EU, and it's a relatively small number. But if the view is that more oats should go into livestock production, then that's a different game, because you can get mycotoxins present in oats and other cereals below regulatory limits, but they still have a massive and detrimental impact on the performance of the animals. And the very last thing I would just add is there are lots and lots of ways to measure mycotoxins, and there's lots of commercial products available. And a lot of the feedback that we've got from many people is the results that they get back really aren't overly reliable. And one of the things that my group is doing here, along with Martin, is we're looking at quite a lot of these commercial tests at the moment to actually see which is the most reliable, and maybe adapting some of them might be more useful for people making decisions, you know, quickly about mycotoxins. So that was really all I wanted to add, and thanks Martin for putting that very nice presentation together.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Martin, can I ask you to share your video there, please? And actually, Chris, if you can stay on with your video, we just have a few questions here coming through that I'm just going to pass on to you. James is asking, how did the level or type of mycotoxins compare between conventionally grown oats versus organic oats? So
in terms of oats, what we see is that with the organic oats from samples we've analysed, low number of samples I'd say now for organic, is that they tend to have lower levels of mycotoxins in them, the organic,
yeah.
And we're putting that down to it's just crop rotation system. In organic oats, we see with oats that have no previous cereal crop grown there, but are treated with a fungicide, they're actually lower again. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of it is down to management issues, you know, with crops, you know. But we do see organic are lower, but I think it's quite well known, like this rotation of crops as a factor, like, you know.
Okay, so Joe wants to know, maybe to Chris, as the sensitivity of methods improve and new metabolites and analytes are looked at, what is the consideration for a normal background in regard to food safety and feed safety in the crop?
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good question from Joe. We always have to look for those things that go into the human food supply chain, what mycotoxins are regulated, and the MRLs, and we work around that. Some of the mycotoxins, I think there's 10 or 11 regulated now, but also on EFSA's radar are quite a number of other mycotoxins, which are all emerging mycotoxins, so you always need to keep an eye on that as well. You can get really tied up with the analysis and finding, you know, we did a study going back last year, and we looked at data from 500,000 mycotoxin analyses across the world over a 5-year period, and somewhere between 60 and 80% of all crops contain mycotoxins. So don't be surprised about those baseline limits, and don't be overly concerned about them. Really, it's about the regulations, how you manage those regulations, how you get reliable testing, and I guess the terminology we start to use now, is we call them producing DSTs, decision support tools, and good analysis is part of that decision-making process.
Okay, thanks, Chris. A quick question, Martin, I think from Rosemary. She says that you mentioned the spraying in your study. Was this a general fungicide program sprayed throughout the season, or a targeted spray to target the mycotoxins?
The there was two different sprays used on both sides. So one of them was targeted as fusarium on one of the sites, and Stephen would would probably give a bit more on that in terms of the sprays that were used at the time. So I suppose I can follow up on that detail later, because there's a program of chemicals that were used in terms of plant growth regulators and
exactly, yeah.
fungicides.
And they would be your standard commercially available compounds and actives as well. Elizabeth wants to know, from Martin, did you have naked oats in the mycotoxin analysis? And if not, or if yes, how did they perform compared to others?
A lot of the oats we're actually looking at were oats from the Department of Agriculture trials. So I'm not sure if there's any naked oats in that.
Okay.
Sure.
A question for you, Chris. Do we know how the fungus gets in? Is it to do with the gate between the husks surrounding the kernels? And do we know any more about that?
So in terms of the fungi will be there, the spores will be there, and then they will look for opportunities to start to grow and replicate. And what they'll look for is the right conditions of temperature, humidity. And a lot of the issues about mycotoxins are actually post-harvest. It's how you dry, how you store, and that is a major part of mitigating about mycotoxin problems. Okay.
Another one, Chris, for yourself, from John. Do mycotoxins occur at similar levels in oats grown in Britain and elsewhere?
It's really linked to climate and what fungi like to grow under particular climatic conditions. But I think, as Martin said in the presentation, because of our change in climate, what we can see is a lot of fungi are starting to march north now. Fungi that was never a problem in Northern Europe, you can start to see in the data that we look at is becoming more problematic.
Yeah, okay, great. Sarah wants to know, Martin, which brand of quick testing unit for mycotoxins do you think is best for labs?
Chris would probably give a better answer to this question, but we have a number of different techniques that we could use. So there's a lateral flow device, which is basically a POSNEG test. They could be used, let's say, maybe in a feed setting. There's kind of question marks over quantitation with a lot of these tests, as Chris was talking about earlier. Generally, when we're in a laboratory setting, the normal test we use for screening in terms of rapid methods is a kind of a live test. So we typically run a calibration curve. But they can be difficult to get quantitative results out of these tests as well, because generally you need a chemical test to kind of back it up as well, because you can get big effects with your sample matrix dignified quantitation. So but I don't have any particular brand I would recommend.
Okay, well they can get in touch with you, I guess, if they want more information or more detail about that. Dermot wants to know, just to clarify, what fungus is involved in producing the mycotoxins, and is the spraying effect likely to be knocking out any alternative fungi or competitors on the head? Now, I know Fiona Doohan is here as well, so I don't know, Fiona, can you actually maybe give us some insight on that in terms of the competition that's going on between microbes in the head?
Yeah, so there was a really nice, it's not allowing me to start the video, but anyway. Yeah, there was a really nice paper about, it's a good few years ago now, on other cereals on wheat. So Microdochium nivale is a natural, it used to be called Fusarium nivale, reclassified as Microdochium, found in heads of cereals. And it was a natural biocontrol agent for other Fusarium. It held other Fusarium back. And Paul Nicholson, about 18 years ago, published a lovely paper, maybe it's a bit more, but around that time, when the strobulurins first came out, to show that the strobulurins knocked out Microdochium, didn't really hold back Fusarium, and the upshot was you ended up with more Fusarium. So I think you have to be very careful when talking about fungicides, because they have very different effects, different modes of action, and different effects on the microbiome. And all the other bugs in the cereal heads have a major role to play in how much Fusarium and how much toxin. And my PhD, just a few years ago, was on looking at the effect of fungicides on Fusarium. And somebody made the point in the chat there that they can stress the fungus to produce more secondary metabolites. And yes, my PhD was funded by Gravo, it was called at the time. And we showed that very clearly, that some fungicides you can actually end up with more mycotoxin. You reduce the fungus, let's say, by 1/2, but you increase the amount of mycotoxin 10 times. So the upshot of that is more toxin.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. Martin has to leave shortly for another engagement, but Chris, there's a question here from Brian. Maybe you can provide some insight on. It's if we get new legislation on T2, HT2, who will be responsible for testing along the supply chain, given that there are limitations on rapid tests currently available? Processors will not be able to obviously leave a lorry in the yard. So I guess this is an issue that, to be fair, I don't know if you have insight on this, but maybe if you do, you might share it with us.
Yeah, thanks, Ewan. And again, it's really a rather important question, because there are a lot of indications that EFSA and the European Commission are going to change the level of mycotoxins, particularly around oats. And I think it's not particularly good news for oats producers or processors, because those levels are going to drop quite considerably. That is going to be a big challenge for the industry, have no doubt about that at all. And what Martin and myself are really keen, and we're doing a lot of work now. We're doing lots and lots of baseline work for a number of different oat companies right across the Ireland, just to, I think we have 300-400 samples sitting in my lab at the moment, just to find out what the baselines are at the moment. And I think what we need to do is really, Queen's and Teagasc and AFBI coming together, is give the advice in terms of how you start to manage and get those levels below the MRLs that will likely be introduced in the not too distant future.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Bruce has just asked in regard to the fungicide applications in the study that Martin described. So Bruce, that study is being published or is about to be published. So we'll discuss with Martin. We can make that available to everybody in the group to get those details. Chris, Patrick wants to know what are the ideal drying storage options to maximize a reduction of any mycotoxins?
Yeah. It's something, in all honesty, you and I don't have a huge amount of expertise in, but I think
14.5 to 15%. And yeah, right. So sorry, Chris, for cutting across you there, dug you out of the hole. The work has been done by Nurse McGann. I'll just throw a video back on there. So I've been asked work has been done by Nurse McGann, and he's published a number of papers on different mycotoxins in terms of Mycotoxin A in particular. I think it's been published for 2 or 3 toxins anyway, but generally 14.5 to about 15%, and I think Teagasc recommends something like 14.5% on the website for storage conditions for moisture.
Okay, thanks, Mark. That's great. So look, there's a few more questions in there that we'll hopefully come back to at the end of the last speaker. I'd like to thank Chris and Martin there for their presentations and dealing with those questions. There's obviously a lot of interest in this area, as we know, so this is something that's going to continue. So I'd like to move on now to our next speaker. So Chris and Martin, thank you. And our next speaker is Eimear Gallagher, who's head of our Food Quality and Science Department here in Teagasc. And Eimear, can you share your screen, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, can you see that okay? That's
perfect, Eimear, thank you.
Okay, great. And thank you very much, Ewan and Lisa, for inviting me to speak here this morning. It's a very positive thing that this initiative has started up, and I know that John Finnan would be delighted to see it actually happening now. So I'm very happy to be involved. As Ewan said, I'm a researcher at Teagasc Food Research Centre in Ashtown in Dublin. My main area of expertise in research is in cereal, more in the ingredient and bakery science aspect. So I'm not an agronomist like Martin, so any faux pas or mistakes I make are purely my own. This morning I'm just going to go through with you some of the healthy properties of oats, which we all probably know already anyway, some of their technical characteristics that they can confer onto new food products, the potential that they have in new food products and beverages, and also maybe how Teagasc from the food side can contribute to the Oats Forum initiative. Okay, so as we know, oats have a number of healthy properties. There are several approved EFSA and FDA health claims that apply to oats. And for example, one of the EFSA health claims from 2010 relating to oat beta-glucan and lowering blood cholesterol and the reduce of heart disease, the risk of heart disease, is where it states that foods should provide at least 3 grams of oat beta-glucan per day. Oat beta-glucan also has a positive influence on blood glucose level. It can help in the management of body weight and blood pressure, and it also increases the viscosity or the bulk of your intestinal contents. Oats can contribute to the maintenance of a balanced microbiome in your body. They're also a good source of antioxidants, for example, vitamin E, phytic acid, phenolics, and they also have secondary metabolites that can have anti-inflammatory properties. Once we can be sure that oats are processed in a purely gluten-free environment with no cross-contamination from gluten-containing cereals like wheat and barley and rye, for example, certified gluten-free oats can also be tolerated by celiacs. And in relation to the composition of the oat itself, a main oat protein fraction are the oat globulins. These are very highly digestible and they have a good essential amino acid profile. With regards to the starch component of oats, the amylopectin to amylose ratio of approximately 3 to 4 means that once you ingest oats, they have a slow digestion. And they kind of assist with slow stomach emptying, which means they provide satiety effects, and satiety means that you feel fuller for longer, so they can help you to eat less. As we said before, they are high, or they have good levels of soluble dietary fiber, which is beta-glucan, which also assists with low glycemic index. And it's also advantageous in cases of diabetes and obesity. In comparison to other grains, oats have a very high fat or oil content, particularly unsaturated fats, for example, oleic acid and linoleic acid. But just to be warned as well, they also do have unsaturated fats present, which can cause storage and sensory problems due to oxidation and due to rancidity causing off flavors. But this can be overcome by pre-processing, for example, steaming and kilning. Oats also are a good source of vitamins and minerals. So then if we're looking at food product development or beverage product development, oats can confer many technical characteristics in the foods. They play an important technical role with regards to solubility, gelling characteristics, and also surface stabilization. And by that, I would mean foaming and emulsification, particularly in the areas of beverages, non-alcoholic and alcoholic beverages. The soluble protein, which are the globulins, particularly at a specific pH, can greatly assist in improving the texture, the color, and the sensory properties of the foods into which they're incorporated. Also, the presence of high molecular weight beta-glucans are the most important for conferring health aspects of the food products. And studies have shown that the molecular weight of beta-glucans are significantly affected by the environment, by the temperature, by precipitation or rain, rather than the actual genotype of the oat themselves. You also need to be careful when you are processing foods with oats. It has been found that the molecular weight of oat beta-glucan can be lower in breads because they can actually be degraded during the baking process due to the high temperatures. So it's just something to bear in mind if you are formulating foods with oats and with beta-glucans. You just need to take care with regards to your formulation and your processing method. So there's many possibilities for the use of oats in foods and beverages, and these are just some of them. As we all know, they're used widely in breakfast cereals and hot breakfast products. They can also be used in pastas, in breads, biscuits, muffins, in beverages, in dairy and dairy-free products. They can be used in malting and brewing, but again, you need to be careful because of the slow mash filtration time during the brewing process. This can result in low permeability or a cloudy beer. Now, from what I've been reading, cloudy beers are starting to be more popular at the moment, but again, they have a different texture and a different flavour, which may be an acquired taste and an acquired mouthfeel for the consumer. So it's just something to keep in mind when using oats in brewing. Oats can also be used in vegan foods and for non-food applications as well, as we know, in feed and also possibly in pharma. So I suppose how Teagasc or Ashtown, or how we can contribute to the Oats Forum initiative. We have dedicated facilities for cereal and bakery research and food innovation and food development at Ashtown. In particular, we have a mill room with a number of different types of mills for fractionating different types of cereals. We have a test bakery where we can formulate a range of different types of baked products. Then we have a cereal chemistry and a rheology and a structure lab. We have access to an imaging centre where we can look at how introducing new ingredients such as oats can change the structure and the function of food products. And we have a sensory science suite. And as Martin has just explained, we also have a micro and chemical residues lab as well. So what we can do, I suppose, in relation to the Oats initiative, we can look at different milling processes and looking at different milling fractions of oats, studying both the protein quantity and the protein quality. And by that I mean the actual makeup of the proteins, which would be the ratio of high molecular weight to low molecular weight, which would in turn affect the baking and the processing properties of the formulations. We can also study the starch property, enzyme activity, look at levels of fibre and beta glucan in the actual flours or the doughs or the end products. We can test the mixing ability of different batters and doughs which contain oats, looking at the elastic properties, whether they're able to retain carbon dioxide during fermentation, for example, if you're making aerated breads or pizza bases. We can study the rheological properties of batters and doughs that contain oat fractions or oat flours. This means a kind of a study of the flow properties and what would happen when you're mixing maybe at higher temperatures or at different speeds. And we can also study, as I was saying, the proofing capability, whether yeasted doughs containing oats have the ability to retain carbon dioxide during proofing, because as we know, oats contain no gluten. And gluten is very important for creating an elastic dough. And when you're proofing normal wheat doughs, the elasticity and the elastic properties help retain carbon dioxide and give off other gases, giving a nice aerated product. So if you're working with oats and oat flours or oat brands, you have a completely different makeup of your dough product. So we're able to monitor all of these during the processing of new foods, I suppose. And once you move from the grain and the flour to the end product, we have the capability to monitor, I suppose, the crust and the crumb texture and the staling characteristics, whether they're becoming harder or softer over time. Looking at things like the specific volume, we can also measure the external and the internal colour. So if we're adding something like an oat flour, which is a very different composition and colour to something like wheat flour or rice flour, we can see how it changes both the external and the internal colour. We also have the ability to study the acoustic energy. That means the sound that the products are making as you're eating them. So if you're introducing something like an oat bran or an oat fibre into a cookie product, we can see how the the sound of it changes as you're chewing it, and whether this is acceptable or not in a sensory capacity for consumers. And of course, we're able to do composition analysis of food products as well. Product imaging and structure is a new area that we are developing as well at the moment, which would be something very interesting if you're developing products containing oats. So we have 3 different types of imaging that we can do for end products. We can look at 2D imaging using a digital imaging camera and LED lighting. We can also look at the microstructure of both the doughs and the end products at a very deep microstructural level, and pick out the proteins and the starch and how the fibers are reacting with each of those. And then also a new area that we're developing is 4D virtual reality. So what we're doing is we're looking at developing new softwares combined with virtual reality goggles, where you can combine the two and use these to monitor the internal structure on a virtual plane or on a 4D plane. So you can literally step inside your end product and look around and see how the different ingredients are interacting with each other, and how they're changing the internal structure, which would ultimately change the sensory and the flavour properties of the products. So at Ashtown we have a sensory science suite, and in Moore Park we have a flavour chemistry suite, and research here would relate to you know, the sensory acceptability of products containing oats, and also the flavour and the aromatic profiles of products containing oats. So at Ashtown we have 18 computerized sensory booths with different lighting and different airflow. So we are able to monitor, you know, different foods as they're being developed. We have a number of different trained sensory panels, and we can also run larger consumer panels. And we're also members of Sensory Food Network Ireland, which gives us access to a number of other sensory facilities as well. Now I've said an awful lot about oats in bakery products and what Teagasc can do, but also I suppose just to highlight that at Ashtown we also do have a prepared consumer food centre, which means we can also offer assistance to the food industry for innovation in other areas as well, such as bakery, which would be my area, but the other areas where we can offer help for food innovation or product development, maybe containing oats, would be for meat products, for different food or vegetable based products, maybe ready meals, sauces, confectionery, and also in developing non-alcoholic beverages. So we have facilities at Ashtown where we can help innovate in all of those areas as well. So I think that is me. So thank you for listening. That's my email address there at the bottom. And if you have any questions, I will do my best to try and answer them for you. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eimear. Great capacity to do so many different things, obviously, with oat-derived products. I have one question here for you from James. Just wondering in regard to the lower levels of oil and fat in Irish oats. Would you like to comment on that? Are you aware of work being done on that? And I suppose comparing oats to other countries.
I'm not particularly aware of it myself, but it could have, I suppose it could work beneficially or not, depending on the makeup of the oats or the makeup of the fats. If it's a higher degree of saturated fat, we need to be very careful with the processing and the storage of the oats before processing, because of, as I was saying earlier, oxidation and rancidity. If the component of the oil was high in unsaturated fat, that would benefit greatly in the health aspect. So it's not work that I've done, or it's not work that I'm aware that is being done at the moment, a comparative study, but certainly something to consider, all right, when you're processing.
So this is a comment from Ger, and to be fair, I don't know if you can, if it's fair to ask you this, but I'll throw it out to you anyway. Just wondering about the use of oats as a milk replacer in the calf industry, but really it's around the fact that oats are very good for bone strength from a nutritional perspective. So I suppose, to be fair, I'm assuming you've done nothing on that, Eimear.
Not quite. No, it's not something that I'd even try and make a stab at it, Christoph. I know that, you know, things like oat milk, or what's considered oat milk, or oat beverages, can be used for people that have, you know, lactose intolerance. Now, I'm not sure in relation to, I'm sorry, I don't think I could answer that.
Okay. To be fair, but I should comment that there is some work ongoing in Teagasc in regard to this, in regard to using oats as a feed ration, and that's something we would hope to have some data on later on in the year. John Valentine has a very interesting comment. You may be interested to know that an oat stout won Champion Beer of Wales in the 90s. The brewery used 16% oats, 10% better, which resulted in it being too viscous and you couldn't drink more than 2 pints. So
eating and drinking in it.
Maybe not too good for the producer of the beer in terms of a market advantage. Do you know, Eimear, has there been much research completed in different cultivars in regard to the differences in nutritional composition? I'm assuming there is a difference in nutritional composition, can vary between cultivars, and obviously more importantly the way the cultivars are managed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There has been work done, both in Ireland and abroad, and I just had one line there in my presentation that it has been found that the way the oats are grown and also the growing conditions significantly affects the makeup or the composition of oats. Not so much between cultivars, but the kind of the environmental factors and the rainfall, I suppose, greatly affects the composition of the oats.
I should add, this is something that we're looking at in Teagasc as part of a multi-institutional project called U-Protein, led by Mark Fenlon. One of the aspects that we're going to look at is seeing how agronomic management can drive changes in the amino acid levels in oats. So the goal really there is to see if we can add value to the crop by tweaking the management of the crop. And that's a project that has only just recently started. So Eimear, look, thank you very much for your presentation. We now move on to Fiona Doohan. Fiona is a Professor of Crop Science in UCD and is the PI of a recently EU-funded project called Healthy Oats, which was launched last week. So Fiona, I'll ask you to turn on your video, please, and over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Ewan and Lisa and Chris, for the opportunity to talk to you for a few minutes this morning. So what I'm going to do is overview a new project that was launched just last week called Healthy Oats. And just to give you a little bit of background to that, so my background is, as Ewan said, I work in crops. Particularly, I worked for about 25 years now on fusarium. And I usually work on wheat and barley, to be honest, but about 4 to 5 years ago, I started working on oats with a guy Martin mentioned earlier called Nourish Megan. And we got funding for a joint UK-Irish project on a project called Oats for the Future. And particularly we were looking at fusarium resistance, toxin levels, and adaptation to future climates. And that project is still ongoing until the end of this year. But we saw some really nice results in that project, and we saw some really nice potential for biodiversity and germplasm to enhance disease resistance. So what you're looking at in this graph, don't worry about the detail, is that we score, every dot here is a different variety of oats. Some of them are old Irish heritage varieties, some are not. And we tested them in 2 scenarios, in the field and in the glasshouse. And you heard Martin and Chris earlier talk about the survey work, which is extremely important. The other important thing with fusarium is that, particularly if you're testing varieties, is to actually spray them with the fungus so you're really sure that they got the disease. And that's what we were doing here. We were spraying these oats. Julio did this work in Lens and UCD. And we did the work in the glasshouse here in UCD, and we compared the results. And we saw that there were some varieties under both conditions over a few years that consistently had low mycotoxin levels. So that tells us there is potential to breed for low mycotoxin levels in oats, which is really promising. And on that basis, quite a few years ago now, we started talking about developing an Ireland-Wales project with our colleagues in Wales and with our colleagues in Teagasc. And at this point, I think about John, because we started this with John Finnan. We started actually talking about this project in the first stages of it in 2017. And with Brexit and everything else, it's been a long, slow process, but the good thing is it's now funded. It's funded through the ERDF fund. And the partners in it are UCD, Teagasc, Aberystwyth University in Wales, and Swansea University in Wales. So what is it? Well, it's a systems-based project, farm to health, or farm to fork, well, beyond fork to health. We want to co-design this with stakeholders as we go forward now. It's not a very long project. We won't do everything in the project, but it's a really good start, and it's a really good injection of money into oat research in Ireland and Wales. So just to overview the expertise that's in this. So you can see where my bias lies. There's a lot of people with the production side. So at the field level, or the pre-farm gate level, we have people from Teagasc, we have Ewen, and probably more people as we go along. And from UCD, we have myself, Tom, and Angela. And from Aberystwyth, we have Catherine, I think, on the call, and we have John Doohan. And we also obviously had John Finnan, who unfortunately isn't with us anymore. And on the consumer and sensory analysis side, we have Amalia, who's working on things very similar to you just heard about there. And we have Richard Brecken in Swansea. And then in terms of processing and product development, we have Dolores in UCD. So what's the goal? So what we're going to do now in the next few slides and briefly today is overview what the project is about. And then there will be opportunities later on as part of a stakeholder forum to really get into the nuts and bolts of the project. But at a very high level, I want to overview it this morning. And at a high level, the goal of the project is to strengthen innovation in oat product development through Irish-Welsh collaboration. Now, just let me move this out of my own way. Okay, so there's 3 bubbles there. The research basically breaks down into 3 bubbles. The first is germplasm evaluation, evaluating varieties and material that could be used to make varieties for the field. We call that the pre-breeding material. Okay. The second bubble there is down in the corner is consumer behaviour and health studies. So we're looking at consumer acceptance, consumer surveys, satiety, etc. And then Richard in Swansea is actually an expert on glycemia and things like that, or diabetes and research in that area. And he'll be looking at linking oats and looking at going from particular varieties straight through to the health implications and focusing, for example, on diabetes. And then Dolores will be looking at processing technology and prototype products and looking at how different varieties might influence the end products, anti-nutritionals, etc., that you might find in oats. So that's the 3 bubbles within the project. And the key outputs, 2 of them. One is promising oat genotypes or pre-breeding material we can now use to breed new varieties for Ireland, or they may already be varieties that exist. Catherine has done an awful lot of work already in Wales on varieties that exist. John has done an awful lot of work on screening varieties in Ireland. Julio has done work in UCD in the past on screening varieties. So we're not starting from scratch here. And the second is really providing the technological platforms for oat product development. Starting at this project where we already heard from this morning, there's a lot more work ongoing in that area in Ireland. So the key steps in this project are first of all to establish a stakeholder group, which we're now going to do, and you'll see an email address if you're interested. I'll put that up in a minute. And then look at the pre-farm gate analysis, the consumer analysis, and the technology and the analysis to support new product development. So pre-farm gate, what are we going to do? We're going to select varieties or germplasm, as we call the pre-breeding material, with different traits. The first trait is disease resistance, looking here, for example, at fusarium and mildew. We're going to look at the nutritional profile. We know that already for many of the varieties. If we don't know it, we'll assess it. We also will look at anti-nutritionals there, I should say. And thirdly, we'll test oat varieties for agronomic performance, and it's particularly important given the EU Green Deal under low inputs and diverse climatic conditions. So those field trials will start next year. And in terms of consumer and health studies, Amalia will be looking at trend analysis in terms of consumer uptake, sensory analysis, looking at the sensory responsive consumers to products developed, prototype products developed with different oat varieties, with different nutritional properties, etc. And Richard will be looking at the glycemic response profile of customers. So is there any difference in oat varieties in terms of how they impact at the health aspect? And obviously we aren't going to cover everything here, but it's really nice to start linking from farm. We always hear farm to fork. I like the idea of farm to health, and that's what we're doing there. In terms of processing technology, what are we going to do in this? For new oat varieties, what Laura's going to be doing is looking at the processing conditions that maximise the functionality, the nutritional value and the health benefits of food products. Looking at rheotechnical functionality of the processed products, and looking at the formulation, looking at establishing formulations and processing protocols to manufacture prototype products containing new oat varieties. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a very exciting project. It's a really nice injection of funding into the oat research in Ireland. We want to build on that. There are many projects under review at the EU level and under preparation at the national level that link into this in terms of breeding, in terms of mycotoxins, etc. And it's great to have this forum to bring this type of research to the community. I leave you with the question, do you want to join the stakeholder group? And I presume, Ewen, we might be circulating these slides later, and we can certainly circulate that email address.
Yeah, absolutely. And also we'll be circulating the slides from the survey. So we'll package them all up into PDFs and we'll forward them to registered attendees.
Okay, so I'll stop there, Ewen, okay? Okay,
great. Thank you, Fiona. So I suppose just one question for you, Fiona. There's a few more questions coming in, obviously. In regard to the biology, so when Fusarium or any of the pathogens start to infect the head in terms of mycotoxin production, just to clarify, the majority of the mycotoxin resides in the husk. Is that correct? So obviously when the husk is removed, do you have an idea of the percentage removal basically through the processing? Because obviously removing the husks removes a lot of the risk.
I don't know in oats, to be honest, but I know, for example, in wheat that it's between 80 and 85%. It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge, yeah. Okay. So in terms of Chris, sorry, go ahead.
And the other thing, come back to something you said earlier in terms of how does it get in. The actual morphology of the head is extremely important. The shape, oat varieties differ in their certain morphology or how they look. That's actually really important for Fusarium head blight and how the pathogen gets into the head. The anthers, how the anthers are stuck out or not stuck out is really important.
Okay, great. Johnny wants to know, to what degree might we be able to use naturally occurring microorganisms to mitigate production of mycotoxins, or not necessarily maybe mycotoxins, but it should obviously be expanded out into other pathogens and diseases
I think this is one of the sort of hot areas that we're going to see now emerging in the next couple of years. So you hear about the gut microbiome in humans, plants have a microbiome, plant have a microbiome. The balance in that head microbiome or the leaf, for example, for mildew, is really important. We now see it in the literature in controlling diseases. You know, there are organisms that weren't pathogens that have become pathogens of cereals, Rhynchosporium, for example, way back, Ramularia. And there's evidence, you know, from historic evidence that that's probably happened because of changes in practices that probably, and this is a big probably, but it is a very good option looking back, probably happened because the microbiome was perturbed. Something upset the microbiome, you know, so we actually have to value the microbiome. That's all the organisms that are inside much more. There's great mileage in terms of controlling diseases in that, but also improving plant health in general, and even improving the nutritional quality right through to the health benefit. Okay.
So Chris is throwing out kind of an open-ended question really, and I suppose maybe in the vein of healthy oats, and as you described there, that the goals of that, he asked, are we missing an opportunity to target oats for the diabetic market?
Exactly, yeah. So that's what we were targeting exactly, Chris, with the Healthy Oats project, because you know, it's nearly 3 million. It sounds great. It's a huge budget, but there's an awful lot of these sort of interreg projects, as anyone who's been involved in them, there's an awful lot that has to go towards administration. So we had
Okay.
to choose a target, and we chose that the glycemic index as the target area with Richard because the expertise was in Wales and because it's a really good opportunity. It's an area that I think you'll see growth in that sector.
Okay, so Sarah is very happy to hear about the project, says it sounds very useful. She wants to know though, Fiona, millers can be very conservative about changing the varieties that they use. So how will you encourage millers to use new varieties that have enhanced disease resilience or any other agronomic advantage?
So I would answer Sarah by saying that we want to work with people from the beginning to see, you know, what are the constraints and to really build that in. So that's why the stakeholder platform in this is actually, it's work packages is important than any of the research, just like the Oats Forum here is. And so we want to build that in from the beginning. I think taking an overview and demonstrating across the whole thing from, you know, there are other things, there are other problems in terms of anti-nutritionals that processors face. You know, if we can look at that and deal with that and make it much more attractive. So we're really looking at systems approach now, which is very different to the sort of approach that would have been funded in the past, to be honest. You know?
Okay. So I suppose it's to follow on, and actually, Lisa, you've come in here, so you should maybe be able to give some insight on it. It follows on from one of Martin's results in regard to the role of rotations in minimizing mycotoxins in oats. So as Martin mentioned, I think it was for the organic oats, it wasn't following on after cereals, it was coming in after maybe a clover mix or something else. So you're getting that break in the crop. So have you done anything in regard to that, Lisa, in your trials in Cross McCreevy?
Not specifically in terms of rotation, no. But I'm not surprised to hear that because obviously there's, you know, carryover from previous crops. But I think rotations is, you know, an area that really does need to be sort of looked at more. You know, we're very much focused on one season, but actually carryover and succession is important. Yeah, on a landscape scale. Yeah,
and of course then the flip side to that, as Dermot has pointed out, that if we needed 1 or 2 years of non-cereals in advance of oats, we end up impacting negatively on the effect of oats in the rotation as that alternative break. So it just highlights the fact that it's not an easy thing to square off. And as you say, we need to put a little bit more work into that, and that's something we intend to do. Fiona, in regard to healthy oats, I suppose when people see these projects are funded, there's great excitement. But you know, when are we going to see impact? And what would you envisage is going to be the first round of impact coming out of healthy oats?
So I think that the first round of impact will be 18 months. We have to be realistic. We need a field trial year, for example, and we need time to digest the results of that. There's no point throwing results of that out willy-nilly to the forum. So I think realistically from the pre-farm gate side, it's 18 months. And probably about the same for the sort of health aspects because they won't really kick in. Those aspects don't actually start until the autumn, so they're going to take at least a year to ramp up.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in terms of breeding a new oats variety, can you give some context as to the time involved? Because it's a long and at times a convoluted and difficult process.
Yeah, so I think people don't realize that, you know, I don't know the oats specifically, but in general for cereals, you could talk about up to 12 years to breed a new variety by conventional techniques. Now, the great thing nowadays is there are new technologies that can really speed up the earlier stages of that. And we have that in Ireland, in Teagasc, there in Oak Park Ewen and in UCD, but all the breeders have this as well, which is speeding up things dramatically, but it still takes time. And you know, there's going to be no new variety at the end of healthy oats, for example. That we be very clear and very transparent with people, unless we might select an existing variety as really good for Irish oats, or that we may select heritage material, which is also very interesting, as having really good genetic material inside it that we want to use in breeding. But even with spread breeding, you're talking about 6 years from now to get something.
Yeah. Okay, great. So Elizabeth has a very specific question. Actually, Fiona, it'll be well suited to yourself. It's in regard to Fusarium again. Is it Graminearium or Culmorum? or are there others that are out there that are the most important for oats?
Yeah, so the problem with fusarium and oats in general, compared to other cereals, is you often don't see it. Okay, it's asymptomatic. So it's hard to judge that you actually have a disease.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are different species. The main species we find in Ireland are the pois, the Langsethia, which is your T2, HT2 toxin producers. And then also you can get the oxysporum, which can produce these. And then you get the culmorum and the graminearum. So you can get right across the board. You get all of those species. But to be really honest, we don't have a great handle on what exact species are in oats at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And actually in a new project we're developing with Queen's and UCD and Teagasc and AFBI, we're going to look at that. What is the distribution of the different species? Because within a species, if you know the species, you know what risk of mycotoxins you have. Also, you deal very differently with different fusarium species. They're all lumped together, but they're actually quite different in how you might manage them.
Mm.
So in terms of that, and you also have, even within a species, you have chemotypes. You have specific subgroups that produce different classes of toxins. So it's all very complicated. But the good news is that we now have the DNA tools to figure that out very quickly.
Okay, thanks, Fiona. Martin, I see you're still there on the call, I hope, and Chris, you're there as well. There's another question I'm gonna ask you in regard to the. It's from Catherine, who basically wants to know what is the evidence that. Martin, you're there.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Sorry, can you just turn on your video, Martin, please? So Catherine just wants to know what is the evidence that the EU levels chosen are detrimental to human health, which I think is a very valid point because the levels are extremely low.
So for which toxins, for all mycotoxins, or?
I suppose it's in a generic sense, yeah.
So basically, like with those assessments that have been carried out by the European Food Safety Authority, and they have a panel of experts in on toxicologists to basically evaluate these compounds, and it's made up of not one scientist, like, but maybe 10 or 12 or maybe more scientists from different countries who contribute to this. So that is kind of the background to it, generally how it's done. Chris will probably add a bit more in terms of the toxicology from the likes of T2 and HT2, because that, like, I think on the BioCop project that Chris was coordinating in the early 2000s, that there was a lot of discussion about that in terms of toxicity on it.
Okay, so great. Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, and yeah, as you say, EFSA are the driving force here, and their role is food safety, but from a precautionary perspective as well. So, so look, there's a few more questions in there, but I'm afraid we're running against the time, and I want to outline very briefly what the next steps of the forum are. I want to so I'll thank Fiona and Martin there for their added contributions. So I'll just share my screen very quickly. And then I'll hand over to Lisa then to wrap up for us. So next steps. So myself and Lisa and Chris have given a good bit of discussion around the forum, obviously in the run up to it. So. But obviously there's no point in meeting just for the sake of meeting. We have to have a plan ahead, and our ambition is quite clear. Our goal is to deliver an all-island strategy or roadmap for the oats sector. And for that, we intend to set up a working group or working groups to define the improvements, identify research targets, which obviously will help us in the research sector. But as we heard today, there are quite a few unanswered questions that we need research to fill the gaps, be that in agronomy, processing, animal feed potential, as we discussed, the rotations. So there will be follow-on surveys, maybe focused interviews, because really what we need is a detailed needs analysis of production, be it conventional, organic, and the processing goals. What's in the feedback we got from you through the initial survey, there were some excellent comments, and many or quite a few quite correctly pointed out that we need to be cognizant of the need to be coming at it from the consumer trend side as well. So it can't just be production driven. We also need to be in tune with what consumer demands are, and that's something that we're going to investigate and develop, hopefully, with agencies who have experience in consumer intelligence and surveys, etc. So really the goal is that it's a two-way information and that we don't miss anything. We plan to have the second meeting of the forum towards the end of November, December of this year, and obviously this is our email here, oatsireland@gmail.com.
Thank you very much, Ewan, and I think you'll all agree it's been a really interesting morning and a great start for the Oats Ireland Forum. Going forward, it's important to keep the momentum going and to build on this first meeting. The Oats Ireland Gmail will continue to be active, and we welcome any feedback using this as your contact point. If anyone is interested in putting the name forward for the steering group with an initial meeting planned for the end of March, beginning of April, please email the Gmail. Our aim is that this core group will include people across the value chain, and we aim to produce a strategy document which will lay out the first ambitions of the Oats Ireland Forum. A key output of the forum is to map out research needs and identify funding opportunities to facilitate that research, including national and international funding calls. So it just remains for me to close the meeting. I would like to thank all our presenters, Chris Green, Martin Danaher, Chris Elliot, Fiona Doohan and Eimear Gallagher. And I would like to pay special thanks to Danaher, who has put a lot of time into helping to get this first meeting off the ground. He's been responsible for coordinating preparatory meetings, carrying out the survey and arranging the meeting today. No small task when we have nearly 80 attendees. So thank you all, and we look forward to our next meeting in November, December.